The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base in San Diego as Commander James Fletcher stepped out of his black sedan. His uniform was pressed to perfection, each ribbon and medal positioned exactly where regulations demanded. At 48 years old, Fletcher had spent 3 decades in the Navy, climbing the ranks through determination, skill, and an unwavering belief in protocol and hierarchy. Today was supposed to be routine, another inspection of SEAL Team facilities before the big ceremony tomorrow, where Admiral Thompson would arrive for the formal dedication of the new training center. Fletcher adjusted his cap and surveyed the scene before him. Groups of sailors moved about their duties with practiced efficiency. The smell of salt water mixed with diesel fuel filled the air. In the distance, he could hear the rhythmic cadence of a training run, young recruits pushing themselves to their limits. Everything looked exactly as it should. What Fletcher didn't notice at first was the woman standing near the entrance to Building 7. She wore civilian clothes, simple jeans and a navy blue jacket, her gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She held a paper coffee cup in one hand and appeared to be studying a clipboard in the other. To Fletcher's eye, she looked like any number of contractors, administrative staff, or possibly a family member waiting for someone. Nothing about her appearance suggested she warranted a second glance. Fletcher made his way toward the main training facility, his mind already running through the checklist of items he needed to verify before tomorrow's ceremony. The obstacle course needed final safety checks. The auditorium had to be arranged with proper seating for dignitaries. Security protocols required one more review. He had maybe 6 hours to ensure everything was perfect before Admiral Thompson arrived, and the Admiral was known for noticing every detail, no matter how small. The woman with the clipboard glanced up as Fletcher passed, but he barely registered her presence. His attention was fixed on Lieutenant Morrison, who was hurrying toward him with a tablet in hand. "Commander Fletcher, sir," Morrison said, slightly out of breath. "We've got the final security clearance roster for tomorrow. Also, the catering company needs confirmation on the timing for the reception." Fletcher took the tablet and began scrolling through the information. "Has everyone on this list been background checked and verified?" "Yes, sir. Down to the last person." "Good. Tell catering we'll need setup complete by 0800. The Admiral's party arrives at 0930, and I want everything ready well in advance." Fletcher handed back the tablet. "What about the demonstration team? Are they prepared?" "SEAL Team 5 has been rehearsing since 0500, sir. Chief Ramirez says they'll be ready." "Says isn't good enough, Lieutenant. I want confirmation, not assumptions." "Yes, sir. I'll verify personally." As Morrison hurried off, Fletcher continued his inspection tour. He walked through the training facility, noting with satisfaction that the floors had been polished to a mirror shine. The equipment organized with military precision. In the weight room, several SEALs were working through their morning routine, their movements powerful and controlled. They acknowledged Fletcher with respectful nods, which he returned with his characteristic stern expression. Fletcher had always maintained a certain distance from the enlisted men, particularly the special operations personnel. He respected their capabilities, certainly, but he believed strongly in maintaining proper military bearing and the chain of command. In his view, familiarity bred contempt, and the Navy functioned best when everyone knew their place and respected rank above all else. Outside, he found Chief Petty Officer Ramirez putting a squad through drills. Ramirez was a 20-year veteran, a SEAL with more combat deployments than most men had birthdays. His face was weathered from years under harsh suns, his eyes sharp and constantly assessing. When he saw Fletcher approaching, he called the squad to attention. "Commander on deck." The SEALs snapped to attention with impressive synchronicity. Fletcher walked down the line, inspecting each man with a critical eye. Their uniforms were immaculate, their bearing professional. He nodded, satisfied. "Chief Ramirez, tomorrow's demonstration needs to be flawless. The Admiral is bringing several members of Congress, and this facility's funding for the next 5 years depends on impressing them." "Understood, sir. My team won't let you down." "See that they don't." Fletcher turned to address the squad. "Gentlemen, you represent the finest warriors this nation has to offer. Tomorrow, the world will be watching. I expect nothing less than perfection." "Hoo-yah, sir!" the SEALs responded in unison. Fletcher moved on, checking off items on his mental list. He inspected the auditorium, the parking arrangements, the communications equipment. Everything had to be perfect. Admiral Thompson was not just any flag officer. He was a legend in the Navy, a man who had commanded carrier strike groups, advised presidents, and earned a chest full of decorations, including the Navy Cross. More importantly, Thompson had a reputation for ending careers of officers who failed to meet his exacting standards. By mid-morning, Fletcher felt confident that preparations were on track. He decided to do one final walkthrough of the perimeter before breaking for lunch. That's when he noticed the woman again. She was still near Building 7, now talking to a young sailor who looked barely old enough to shave. The sailor seemed animated, gesturing as he spoke, and the woman listened with patient attention, occasionally asking questions. Fletcher frowned. Civilians wandering around the base always made him nervous, even with proper credentials. He altered his course to investigate. As he approached, the young sailor suddenly noticed him and snapped to attention. "Commander Fletcher, sir!" Fletcher returned the salute. "At ease, sailor." "Who is this?" He gestured toward the woman. The sailor looked confused by the question. "Sir, this is... I'm just visiting." The woman interrupted smoothly, extending her hand to Fletcher. "Evelyn Torres. I used to work in naval administration years ago. Thought I'd come see how things have changed." Fletcher shook her hand briefly, noting her firm grip. Something about her seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Mrs. Torres, I'm sure you understand that with tomorrow's ceremony, we have heightened security. If you're not here on official business, I'll need to ask you to complete your visit and check out through the main gate." Evelyn smiled, and Fletcher noticed her eyes were the kind of steel gray that seemed to miss nothing. "Of course, Commander. I understand completely. I'll be out of your way shortly." "See that you are, sailor. Return to your duties." "Yes, sir." The young man saluted and hurried off, though Fletcher noticed him glance back at Evelyn with an expression that seemed oddly like concern. Fletcher watched Evelyn for a moment longer, then continued his rounds. Something about the encounter nagged at him, but he couldn't quite identify what. Perhaps it was simply his nerves about tomorrow's ceremony. Everything had to be perfect, and unexpected elements, even harmless ones, like a retired administrator, created variables he couldn't control. The rest of the day passed in a blur of final preparations. Fletcher worked through lunch, coordinating with security, double-checking arrangements, reviewing schedules. By 1700 hours, he was satisfied that everything was ready. Tomorrow, Admiral Thompson would arrive, inspect the facility, watch the SEAL demonstration, and hopefully recommend full funding for the new training center. It would be a triumph for Fletcher's career, another stepping stone toward his own eventual flag rank. That evening, Fletcher returned to his quarters on base. He lived alone, divorced for 5 years now. His ex-wife had tired of military life, of the constant relocations and long deployments. They had no children, which Fletcher sometimes told himself was for the best. The Navy was his life, his purpose, and it demanded total dedication. He prepared a simple dinner, reviewed his notes one more time, then tried to relax with a book, but his mind kept returning to the ceremony, mentally rehearsing every detail, anticipating potential problems. What if the weather turned bad? What if one of the SEALs made a mistake during the demonstration? What if Admiral Thompson asked a question he couldn't answer? Fletcher finally fell asleep sometime after midnight, his dreams filled with inspections and protocol. The next morning arrived clear and bright, perfect weather for the ceremony. Fletcher was up at 0500, showering and dressing with extra care. He examined himself in the mirror, ensuring every detail was correct. His uniform was immaculate, his shoes polished to a high gloss, his ribbons perfectly aligned. He looked like what he was, a career officer who had devoted his life to the service. By 0700, Fletcher was back at the facility, conducting final checks. The catering staff was setting up the reception area. Security personnel were at their posts. The SEAL demonstration team was running through last-minute preparations under Chief Ramirez's watchful eye. Everything was proceeding according to plan. At 0845, Lieutenant Morrison approached with news. "Commander, Admiral Thompson's motorcade is 10 minutes out. They're ahead of schedule." Fletcher felt his stomach tighten, but his face remained impassive. "Very well. Alert all personnel. I want everyone at their assigned positions immediately." "Yes, sir." Fletcher made his way to the main entrance where he would formally receive the Admiral. A small honor guard was already in position, young sailors standing at rigid attention, their rifles perfectly aligned. Fletcher took his place at the front, his back straight, his expression serious. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Fletcher could feel sweat beginning to form under his collar despite the mild temperature. This was it, the moment that would define whether his careful planning had been sufficient. Finally, a motorcade of black SUVs appeared at the gate. They rolled through security and approached the main building, moving with the unhurried confidence of official power. The vehicles stopped, and several Navy officers emerged from the first SUV, all wearing their dress uniforms, all carrying themselves with the bearing of senior leaders. Then Admiral Thompson stepped out of the second vehicle. He was a tall man, probably 6'2", with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades at sea. His uniform bore the impressive array of ribbons and decorations earned over a distinguished career. Even at 63, he moved with athletic grace, his posture perfect, his eyes taking in everything around him. Fletcher called the honor guard to attention and stepped forward to render his salute. "Admiral Thompson, welcome to Naval Special Warfare Training Facility, San Diego. Commander James Fletcher, sir, it's an honor to have you here." Thompson returned the salute with precision. "Commander Fletcher, thank you for the warm welcome." His voice was deep and carried natural authority. "I've been looking forward to seeing what you've accomplished here. Sir, we've prepared a full itinerary, including a demonstration by SEAL Team 5 and a comprehensive tour of the new training facilities." "Excellent. Let's get started, shall we?" The group began moving toward the auditorium where the formal ceremony would begin. Fletcher walked beside the Admiral, pointing out various features of the base, answering questions with the precise detail he had rehearsed. Thompson listened attentively, occasionally asking for clarification or additional information. They were halfway to the auditorium when Fletcher noticed something odd. Several SEALs who had been working near the obstacle course had stopped what they were doing. They were staring at something, or someone, in the Admiral's party. One of them, a grizzled operator named Daniels, who Fletcher knew had multiple combat deployments, looked genuinely shocked. Fletcher followed their gaze, but saw only the usual collection of aides and junior officers accompanying the Admiral. Nothing seemed out of place. They continued toward the auditorium, but Fletcher noticed more SEALs stopping to look. Some were coming out of buildings, drawn by some invisible signal. Within minutes, there were perhaps 30 special operators gathering at a respectful distance, all of them watching the Admiral's party with expressions Fletcher couldn't quite read. It wasn't hostile, but it was intense, focused. "Is something wrong, Commander?" Admiral Thompson had noticed Fletcher's distraction. "I'm not sure, sir. The men seem unusually interested in our arrival." Thompson's mouth curved in a slight smile. "Do they? How observant of them." The group reached the auditorium entrance. Fletcher was about to guide everyone inside when Chief Ramirez appeared, moving with unexpected urgency. He approached the Admiral, but then his eyes fixed on someone else in the party, someone Fletcher hadn't really noticed, and his expression transformed into something Fletcher had never seen on the tough SEAL's face before. It looked like awe. Ramirez came to attention and rendered the sharpest salute Fletcher had ever witnessed. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's an honor, a genuine honor." Fletcher turned, confused, trying to see who Ramirez was addressing, and that's when he saw her. Evelyn Torres, the woman from yesterday, the one he had dismissed as a retired administrator, was standing quietly at the edge of the Admiral's group. She wore a different jacket today, still civilian clothes, but now Fletcher noticed something he had missed before. On her jacket, lapel was a small pin, one he should have recognized immediately. It was the trident, the special warfare insignia of a Navy SEAL. Fletcher felt his mind trying to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. The trident pin on Evelyn Torres's jacket was unmistakable now that he was actually looking at it. But that was impossible. Women hadn't been allowed in SEAL training until recent years, and this woman was clearly in her late 60s. There had to be some mistake, some misunderstanding. Perhaps it was a memorial pin, something worn to honor a fallen family member. But then Fletcher saw more SEALs arriving, drawn from every corner of the base, as if by some magnetic force. They formed up in an impromptu line, their positions instinctive and perfectly spaced. And one by one, each of them came to attention and saluted Evelyn Torres with a precision and respect that Fletcher had rarely witnessed in his entire career. She returned each salute with equal precision, her gray eyes moving from face to face, acknowledging each man personally. Some of them had tears streaming down their weathered cheeks. Others stood rigid, their jaws clenched with emotion. All of them looked at her with something that went beyond military courtesy or professional respect. It was reverence. Fletcher turned to Admiral Thompson, searching for an explanation, but the Admiral simply stood watching the scene with a slight smile, making no move to interrupt. "I don't understand," Fletcher said quietly, aware that his voice sounded weak and confused. "Who is she?" Admiral Thompson looked at him, and Fletcher saw something in those eyes that might have been disappointment. "Commander, do you really not know? Did you do no research on who would be accompanying me today?" "Sir, I was provided a list of names and security clearances, but I was told the focus should be on your arrival and the facility inspection." "The focus should always be on knowing who you're dealing with, Commander." Thompson gestured toward Evelyn. "That woman is Captain Evelyn Torres, retired. She was one of the first women to serve in naval intelligence during the Cold War, but that's not why these men are saluting her." Fletcher's confusion deepened. "I don't understand, sir. 27 years ago, Captain Torres led a classified operation in the Middle East. The official records are still sealed, but I can tell you this much. 6 SEAL team members were trapped behind enemy lines after their extraction went sideways. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. Torres disobeyed direct orders from Theater Command, commandeered a helicopter, and flew into a hot landing zone to pull them out. She took enemy fire that killed her co-pilot and severely damaged the helicopter. She was wounded herself, but she got all 6 SEALs out alive." Thompson's voice grew quieter, but more intense. For that action, Captain Torres was awarded the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, and a Purple Heart. She was also quietly forced into early retirement because she had embarrassed several senior officers by demonstrating what real courage looks like. Some of those SEALs she saved went on to train the next generation of operators. Others rose to command positions themselves. Every SEAL in the Navy knows her story. Commander. It's part of their culture, part of what they aspire to be. She represents the kind of person who will burn their career to ash before they'll abandon their people. Fletcher felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. He looked back at Evelyn Torres, seeing her completely differently now. The confident way she stood, the alert awareness in her eyes, the absolute calm while being surrounded by dozens of elite warriors, all made sense now. This wasn't some retired administrator. This was a combat veteran who had proven herself under the worst possible circumstances. More SEALs were arriving, words spreading through the base at incredible speed. There were perhaps 50 now, forming neat ranks without anyone giving orders. Their discipline instinctive and perfect. Chief Ramirez had tears on his face as he saluted. Several younger SEALs looked stunned, as if they couldn't believe they were seeing someone they had only heard about in stories. Fletcher realized with growing horror that he had dismissed this woman yesterday, had essentially ordered her off the base, had treated her like an unwelcome nuisance. The memory of his condescending tone made him feel physically sick. Evelyn finished returning the last salute, and then raised her voice, speaking clearly so all the gathered SEALs could hear. "Gentlemen, thank you for this welcome. It means more than you can know. But we're here for important business today, and I know Commander Fletcher has worked very hard to prepare for this ceremony. Let's not disrupt his carefully laid plans any further." There was genuine warmth in her voice, and Fletcher realized she was trying to give him an out, trying to save him from further embarrassment. It only made him feel worse. The SEALs began dispersing reluctantly, many of them still glancing back at Evelyn as they returned to their duties. Within minutes, the crowd had thinned, though Fletcher noticed that Chief Ramirez and several senior operators remained nearby, clearly unwilling to miss any chance to be in her presence. Admiral Thompson gestured toward the auditorium. "Shall we proceed, Commander Fletcher?" Fletcher nodded numbly and led the group inside. The auditorium was arranged perfectly, exactly as he had planned, with seating for about 200 people. The stage held a podium decorated with the Navy flag and the SEAL team insignia. Everything looked professional and impressive, but Fletcher barely noticed. His mind was reeling, trying to process what he had just witnessed and what it meant about his own blindness. He had spent yesterday so focused on protocol and procedure that he had completely missed the presence of a genuine hero. More than that, he had treated her with casual dismissal, had seen her as nothing more than a minor inconvenience to be managed. The ceremony proceeded according to Fletcher's carefully prepared schedule. Admiral Thompson gave a speech about the importance of the SEAL teams, the sacrifices made by special operations personnel, and the critical need for facilities like this one to train the next generation of warriors. Several members of Congress who had accompanied the Admiral added their own remarks about funding and support. Through it all, Fletcher felt like he was moving through a dream. He performed his duties, introduced speakers, ensured everything ran smoothly, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. He kept glancing at Evelyn Torres, who sat quietly in the front row, listening attentively to every speaker. She didn't seek attention, didn't interrupt, didn't try to make the ceremony about her. She was simply present, supportive, professional. After the speeches concluded, the group moved outside for the SEAL demonstration. Chief Ramirez's team performed flawlessly, executing a complex tactical scenario that showcased their skills in close-quarters combat, precision shooting, and coordinated movement. The demonstration was exactly what Fletcher had hoped for, technically perfect and visually impressive. But he noticed something he had never paid attention to before. As the SEALs performed their maneuvers, they weren't just executing techniques, they were demonstrating a culture. They moved with perfect coordination, each man anticipating his teammates' actions, trusting them completely, willing to put himself in danger to protect the others. It was more than training. It was a bond forged through shared hardship and absolute commitment. And that bond, Fletcher now understood, extended to anyone who proved themselves worthy of it. Rank didn't matter, gender didn't matter, background didn't matter. What mattered was character, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for your people. Evelyn Torres had demonstrated those qualities in the most extreme circumstances possible, and the SEALs had never forgotten it. The demonstration concluded to enthusiastic applause from the congressional delegation. Admiral Thompson looked pleased, which meant the funding for the facility was likely secure. By any objective measure, the ceremony had been a complete success. But Fletcher felt hollow inside. After the demonstration, there was a reception in the facility's main hall. Caterers had prepared an impressive spread, and Navy personnel mingled with civilian guests and congressional staff. Fletcher moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, answering questions, playing his role as the commander who had organized this successful event. He watched from a distance as Evelyn Torres was surrounded by SEALs, young and old, all of them eager to speak with her, to shake her hand, to express their respect. She handled the attention with grace, speaking with each man as if he were the only person in the room, asking about their training, their families, their careers. She remembered names, referenced specific deployments, demonstrated an encyclopedic knowledge of special operations history and culture. Chief Ramirez approached Fletcher with 2 glasses of champagne, offering one to the commander. "Hell of a day, sir." Fletcher took the glass but didn't drink. "Chief, I need to ask you something. Did you know Captain Torres would be here today?" "No, sir. But I recognized her immediately when she arrived with the Admiral." Ramirez took a sip of his champagne. "The Angel of Al-Khobar. That's what the old-timers call her. The operation that went down in '98, the one where she saved those 6 SEALs, it happened in a city called Al-Khobar. Every SEAL candidate learns about it during training, though they don't always get her name. They just hear about this Navy intelligence officer who risked everything to bring people home. Why isn't she more widely known? Why haven't I heard of her?" Ramirez shrugged. The operation was classified for years, and when she retired, she didn't want publicity. From what I understand, she went to work for a private defense contractor, continued serving in her own way. But in the SEAL community, she's a legend. There are guys walking around today, training the next generation, who owe their lives to her. Their kids and grandkids exist because she was willing to burn her career rather than leave them behind. Fletcher watched Evelyn across the room. She was laughing at something a young SEAL had said, her face animated and warm. She looked nothing like the stern, formal flag officers Fletcher had spent his career trying to emulate. She looked like someone who genuinely cared about people, who saw them as individuals rather than ranks or positions. "I dismissed her yesterday," Fletcher said quietly. "I saw her on the base and told her to leave. I thought she was just some civilian contractor with too much time on her hands." Ramirez gave him a long look. "With respect, sir, that doesn't surprise me." "What's that supposed to mean, Chief?" "Sir, you're a good officer. You run a tight ship, you know regulations inside and out, and you get things done. But sometimes I think you're so focused on the structure that you forget about the people inside it. You see ranks and positions instead of human beings." Fletcher wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't. Everything Ramirez said was true. Fletcher had spent his entire career treating the Navy as a hierarchy to be climbed, a system to be mastered. He had forgotten, or perhaps never learned, that it was really about people, relationships, trust, and mutual respect. "How do I fix that, Chief?" Ramirez smiled slightly. "Well, sir, you could start by actually talking to Captain Torres. Maybe listen to her story firsthand. Maybe ask her what she thinks makes a good leader. And maybe, just maybe, consider that there's more than one way to serve with honor." Fletcher nodded slowly. The thought of approaching Evelyn Torres filled him with dread. What could he possibly say to her that wouldn't sound hollow or self-serving? How could he apologize for his blindness, his arrogance, his complete failure to recognize who she was and what she represented? But he had to try. He owed her that much. Fletcher made his way across the room, weaving through clusters of chatting guests. As he approached, several of the SEALs surrounding Evelyn noticed him and stepped back slightly, creating space. Their expressions were neutral but watchful. Fletcher had the distinct impression that if he said or did anything disrespectful, these men would remember it. "Captain Torres," he said, his voice sounding uncertain even to his own ears. "I wonder if I might have a word with you privately." Evelyn looked at him with those steel-gray eyes, and Fletcher felt like she could see right through him, could read every thought and doubt in his mind. But her expression remained pleasant. "Of course, Commander. Gentlemen, if you'll excuse me." She followed Fletcher to a quiet corner of the room, away from the crowd. For a moment, Fletcher struggled to find the right words. Finally, he decided that simple honesty was his only option. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. Yesterday, I treated you with disrespect. I dismissed you as unimportant, told you to leave the base, and completely failed to recognize who you were and what you've done. There's no excuse for my behavior, and I'm deeply sorry." Evelyn smiled, and Fletcher was struck by how kind she looked. "Commander, you had no reason to recognize me. I was wearing civilian clothes. I didn't introduce myself properly, and I was wandering around during a critical time for you. If anything, your security concerns were reasonable." "That's generous of you to say, but it doesn't change the fact that I made assumptions based on appearances. I saw an older woman in casual clothes and concluded she wasn't important. That reflects poorly on me and my judgment." "It reflects on your training and experience, Commander. The military teaches us to read ranks, to respect the hierarchy, to know who matters based on external markers. That's not entirely wrong. It's necessary for discipline and order. But it can make us blind to other forms of value and contribution." Fletcher found himself genuinely curious. How did you learn to see past that? You must have dealt with the same pressures, the same culture. "I did," Evelyn acknowledged. "And I made plenty of mistakes of my own. But I learned something important during my years in naval intelligence. Information doesn't respect rank. Sometimes the most critical intelligence comes from the most unexpected sources. A junior enlisted sailor might notice something an admiral misses. A civilian contractor might have connections that a career officer lacks. If you dismiss people based on their position or appearance, you miss opportunities and you make bad decisions." "Is that what happened in Al-Khobar? You saw something others missed?" Evelyn's expression grew more serious. "What happened in Al-Khobar was a failure of leadership at multiple levels, Commander. 6 brave men were left in an impossible situation because senior officers prioritized mission parameters over human lives. They were deemed expendable, acceptable losses in pursuit of larger objectives. I couldn't accept that. I still can't. Admiral Thompson said you disobeyed direct orders to extract them. I did. I was told to stand down, that the risks were too high, that we couldn't justify additional casualties trying to save people who were probably already dead. But I had intelligence that said otherwise. I knew those men were alive, and I knew they deserved a chance. So I took matters into my own hands. And you were punished for it. I was encouraged to retire, yes. Some people called it a punishment. I called it a small price to pay for 6 lives. Evelyn paused, her gaze distant. Those men went home to their families, Commander. They raised children, trained the next generation of SEALs, contributed to their communities. How do you measure the value of that against one career? Fletcher felt something shifting inside him, a fundamental recalibration of his values and priorities. You don't, I suppose. Some things are beyond measure. Exactly, Evelyn focused on him again. Commander, can I tell you something? You seem like a good officer. You're organized, detail-oriented, and you clearly care about doing things properly. Those are valuable qualities, but don't let them make you rigid. Don't let protocol become more important than people. The Navy needs officers who can balance the rules with human judgment, who can see past ranks to recognize character and capability. Fletcher absorbed her words, feeling their weight. How do I learn to do that? How do I change patterns that have been ingrained over 30 years? Evelyn considered the question carefully. Start by listening more than you talk. When you meet someone, don't immediately categorize them by their rank or position. Ask questions. Be genuinely curious about their experiences and perspectives. You'll be amazed what you learn. Is that how you operated in naval intelligence? That's how I survived in naval intelligence, Evelyn corrected. The military has always been a male-dominated institution, and it was even more so when I was coming up. I couldn't rely on rank or position to get respect. I had to earn it through competence and relationships. I had to prove my value every single day. It was exhausting, but it taught me to see people for who they really were, not what they appeared to be. Admiral Thompson appeared at Fletcher's elbow, interrupting their conversation. Captain Torres, I hate to steal you away, but the congressional delegation would like to meet you. Apparently, word has spread about who you are, and they want to hear your story. Evelyn smiled warmly. Of course, Admiral. Commander Fletcher, thank you for the conversation. I hope we'll have a chance to talk more later. She moved away with Admiral Thompson, leaving Fletcher alone with his thoughts. He watched her across the room, now surrounded by congressmen and their aides, all of them listening raptly as she spoke. She had a natural charisma that had nothing to do with rank or position and everything to do with authentic presence and hard-won wisdom. Lieutenant Morrison found Fletcher a few minutes later. Sir, the caterers want to know when we should start clearing the reception. Also, the base commander called and wants a debrief on how everything went. Fletcher looked around the room, seeing it differently now. The reception wasn't just a formal obligation to be managed and concluded. It was an opportunity for people to connect, to share stories, to build relationships that might matter in ways he couldn't predict. Ending it prematurely because the schedule said it should be over seemed suddenly arbitrary and small-minded. Tell the caterers to keep everything set up for another hour. People are still eating and networking. And tell the base commander I'll call him tomorrow with a full report. Morrison looked surprised but nodded. Yes, sir. Fletcher spent the next hour moving through the reception with a new mindset. Instead of just accepting congratulations and moving on, he actually engaged with people. He asked a young sailor about his family and learned he was from a small town in Iowa and had joined the Navy to see the world. He spoke with a civilian contractor about her background and discovered she had a PhD in materials science and was developing new body armor technologies. He listened to a SEAL talk about a recent deployment and heard the genuine passion in the man's voice when he described working with local interpreters. Every conversation revealed something unexpected, some dimension of personality and experience that Fletcher had been missing by staying on the surface. It was exhausting in a way that military protocol never was, requiring genuine attention and emotional engagement rather than just following established patterns. But it was also energizing, revealing a richer and more complex world than the one he had been inhabiting. As the reception finally wound down and guests began departing, Chief Ramirez approached Fletcher again. "Sir, that was a hell of a ceremony. Everything went perfectly." "It did, didn't it?" Fletcher agreed. "Chief, I wanted to thank you for what you said earlier. You were right about my blind spots." Ramirez looked uncomfortable with the praise. "Sir, I may have been out of line." "No. You were honest. That's what I need. People willing to tell me the truth instead of just what I want to hear." Fletcher paused, then continued. "I'm going to make some changes in how I operate, how I interact with the people under my command. I'd appreciate your input and feedback as I work on that." "I'd be honored, sir." After the last guests had departed, Fletcher found himself alone in the auditorium, looking at the empty chairs and the decorations that would need to be taken down. The day had been a success by every measurable standard. The ceremony had gone perfectly. The Admiral was pleased, the funding was secure, and Fletcher's career prospects looked better than ever. But he felt different inside, like something fundamental had shifted. Meeting Evelyn Torres, hearing her story, witnessing the respect she commanded from the SEALs, all of it had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and his priorities. He had spent 3 decades focused on climbing the ranks, on doing everything by the book, on maintaining proper military bearing and protocol. And those things had brought him success in conventional terms, but they had also isolated him, made him rigid, blinded him to the human dimensions of leadership. Evelyn Torres had sacrificed her career to save 6 lives. She had chosen people over protocol, courage over caution, and the SEALs had never forgotten it. They honored her not because of her rank, but because of her character, because she had demonstrated the kind of values they aspired to live by. Fletcher realized he wanted that kind of respect, that kind of legacy. He didn't want to be remembered as the commander who ran a tight ship and followed regulations perfectly. He wanted to be remembered as someone who actually made a difference in people's lives, who saw them as individuals, and helped them become better versions of themselves. It was a daunting realization, and Fletcher wasn't sure he had the capacity to change so fundamentally, but he knew he had to try. The next morning, Fletcher arrived at his office early to find a handwritten note on his desk. It was from Evelyn Torres, written on naval stationery in elegant script. "Commander Fletcher, thank you for your honesty and openness yesterday. It takes courage to acknowledge our blind spots and commit to growth. I saw something in you that many people miss, a genuine desire to improve and serve well. Don't lose that. The Navy needs officers who can balance the demands of protocol with the wisdom of human judgment. You have the potential to be that kind of leader. Stay curious, stay humble, and never stop learning. With respect, Captain Evelyn Torres." Fletcher read the note 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in his desk drawer. He would keep it there as a reminder of this day, of the lesson he had learned, of the person he wanted to become. Over the following weeks and months, Fletcher made conscious efforts to change his leadership approach. He started having regular coffee meetings with junior officers and enlisted personnel, asking about their careers, their challenges, their goals. He attended training sessions not just to inspect and evaluate, but to actually understand what the SEALs did and why they did it that way. He read books on leadership that emphasized emotional intelligence and relationship building, concepts that had seemed soft and irrelevant to him before. The changes didn't come easily. Fletcher found himself constantly fighting against ingrained habits, against the instinct to rely on rank and protocol instead of genuine connection. He made mistakes, misread situations, sometimes came across as awkward or insincere, but he kept trying, kept learning, kept pushing himself to see people rather than just positions. Chief Ramirez became an unexpected ally in this transformation. The tough SEAL had a gift for reading people and situations, and he would quietly point out when Fletcher was falling back into old patterns or missing important social cues. Their relationship evolved from strictly professional to something approaching genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and honest communication. 6 months after the ceremony, Fletcher was in his office when he received a phone call from Admiral Thompson's aide. The Admiral wanted to speak with him personally, which immediately triggered Fletcher's old anxieties. What had he done wrong? What problem had emerged? But when Thompson came on the line, his voice was warm. "Commander Fletcher, I wanted to let you know that the congressional delegation was extremely impressed with the training facility and the ceremony. We've secured full funding for the next 5 years, plus additional resources for equipment upgrades. You did excellent work. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the feedback. But that's not really why I'm calling. Thompson paused. I've been hearing interesting things about you, Commander. Word has gotten back to me that you've been making changes in how you lead, that you've been more engaged with your people, more focused on development and relationships. Is that accurate? Fletcher felt a moment of panic, wondering if his efforts to change were being seen as weakness or a departure from proper military bearing. But he decided to be honest. Yes, sir, it is. Meeting Captain Torres was a wake-up call for me. I realized I had been so focused on protocol and procedure that I was missing the human element of leadership. I've been trying to correct that. Good. Thompson's approval was evident in his voice. The Navy needs more officers like that, Fletcher. We have plenty of people who can follow regulations and run tight operations. What we lack are leaders who can inspire genuine loyalty and bring out the best in their people. That's what Captain Torres did, and it's why she's still respected decades after her retirement. She was an exceptional person, sir. She was, and still is. But here's the thing, Commander. She wasn't born exceptional. She became that way through experience, through making hard choices, through learning from mistakes. You have the same opportunity. The question is whether you'll take it. I'm trying, sir. Every day. I know you are. That's why I'm offering you a new assignment. Thompson's tone became more formal. I'm putting together a special task force to review training and development programs across naval special warfare. We need to ensure we're not just training warriors, but developing leaders who can operate in complex, ambiguous environments where the rulebook doesn't always apply. I want you to be part of that effort. Fletcher felt stunned. This was exactly the kind of assignment that could define the rest of his career, but in a completely different direction than he had been heading. Sir, I'm honored. But wouldn't someone with more special operations experience be better suited for this? We'll have plenty of operators on the team. What we need is someone who understands the institutional Navy, who knows how to navigate the bureaucracy, but who also has the wisdom to recognize that sometimes the system needs to be challenged. Based on what I've seen from you over the past 6 months, I think you're that person. What do you say? Fletcher thought about Evelyn Torres, about her willingness to risk everything for what she believed was right. He thought about the SEALs who still honored her decades later because she had proven herself when it mattered most. He thought about the kind of leader he wanted to be and the legacy he wanted to leave. I accept, sir. When do I start? Report to my office next month. We'll brief you then. Thompson paused again. Fletcher, I'm going to tell you something in confidence. When I brought Captain Torres to that ceremony, it was a test for you. A test, sir? I wanted to see how you would handle an unexpected element, something that didn't fit into your carefully organized plans. More importantly, I wanted to see if you had the capacity to recognize your own mistakes and learn from them. A lot of officers in your position would have become defensive, would have found ways to rationalize their behavior or blame others. You did the opposite. You acknowledged your blind spots and committed to change. That's rare, and it's valuable. Fletcher felt his throat tighten with emotion. Captain Torres said something similar to me, sir. She said the Navy needs officers who can balance protocol with human judgment. I'm trying to become that. Keep trying, Commander. The Navy is counting on it. Thompson out. The line went dead, and Fletcher sat in his office for a long time, processing what had just happened. His career was taking a completely unexpected turn, away from the traditional path of command at sea, and towards something more focused on people and institutional change. It was both exciting and terrifying. He pulled out Evelyn's note and read it again, finding strength in her words. Then he made a decision. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he had looked up weeks ago, but had been too nervous to call. Evelyn Torres answered on the third ring. Hello? Captain Torres, this is Commander James Fletcher. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Commander Fletcher, what a pleasant surprise. How are you? I'm well, ma'am. I wanted to call and thank you again for your kindness at the ceremony. Your words had a profound impact on me, and I've been working on applying your advice. I'm glad to hear that. How's it going? It's challenging, Fletcher admitted. I'm discovering that changing ingrained patterns is harder than I expected. but I'm seeing results. My relationships with my people are deeper, and I think I'm becoming a more effective leader. That's wonderful. Growth is always uncomfortable, but it's worth it. Admiral Thompson just offered me a position on a special task force reviewing training and development programs for naval special warfare. He said it was partly because of the changes he's seen in me over the past 6 months. That's fantastic news, Commander. You'll do excellent work in that role. Fletcher took a deep breath, gathering his courage. Ma'am, I was wondering if you might be willing to meet with me occasionally, to provide guidance and mentorship as I take on this new assignment. I realize you're retired and have your own commitments, but your experience and perspective would be invaluable to me. There was a pause on the line, and Fletcher worried he had overstepped. But then Evelyn spoke, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Commander, I would be honored to mentor you, on one condition. What's that, ma'am? Stop calling me ma'am. My name is Evelyn, and if we're going to work together, we should do so as colleagues, not as superior and subordinate. The whole point is to move beyond rigid hierarchies, remember? Fletcher laughed, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. Deal. And you can call me James. All right, James, why don't we meet for coffee next week? You can tell me more about this task force, and we can start mapping out how you want to approach it. That sounds perfect. Thank you, Evelyn. This means more to me than you probably realize. I think I do realize it, actually. We all need someone to help us see our blind spots and challenge us to grow. I've had mentors who did that for me, and I'm happy to pay it forward. After they arranged the details and ended the call, Fletcher sat back in his chair and looked around his office. The walls were covered with certificates, commendations, and photos documenting his 30-year career. All of it represented a certain kind of success, a steady climb up the ranks through competence and dedication. But Fletcher realized now that those achievements, while meaningful, were only part of the story. The real measure of his career wouldn't be the ranks he attained or the ceremonies he organized. It would be the lives he touched, the people he helped develop, the culture he influenced for the better. That evening, Fletcher did something he hadn't done in years. Instead of working late at his office, he left at a reasonable hour and stopped by the SEAL Team Recreation Center where many of the operators gathered after training. He didn't go there to inspect or evaluate, he went simply to be present, to talk with people, to learn from them. Chief Ramirez was there, along with several other SEALs Fletcher had come to know over the past months. They welcomed him warmly, offered him a beer, and included him in their conversation. They talked about training, deployments, families, challenges, dreams. Fletcher listened more than he spoke, asking questions when he was genuinely curious, sharing his own experiences when it seemed appropriate. At one point, a young SEAL named Martinez said something that stuck with Fletcher. You know, sir, when you first got here, we all thought you were just another by-the-book commander who didn't really get what we do. But you've changed. You actually seem to care about us as people, not just as assets to be managed. It makes a difference. Fletcher felt a lump in his throat. Thank you, Martinez. That means a lot. I'll be honest, I was exactly what you thought I was. Meeting Captain Torres showed me I needed to be better. The Angel of Al-Khobar, another SEAL said reverently. Man, what a day that was, seeing her in person. My instructor in Bud S. used to tell her story. He said she represented what every naval officer should aspire to be, someone who puts people before politics. I think we could all learn from her example, Fletcher agreed. In fact, I'm going to have the chance to work with her on a new project. If you guys are interested, maybe we could arrange for her to come talk to the team sometime, share her experiences and perspectives. The enthusiasm in the room was immediate and overwhelming. Every man there wanted the chance to hear from Evelyn Torres, to learn from someone who had become a legend in their community. As Fletcher drove home that night, he thought about how different his life looked now compared to 6 months ago. Then, he had been focused on a single ceremony, on making sure every detail was perfect according to his carefully planned schedule. He had been blind to anything that didn't fit his narrow definition of what mattered. Now, he was building relationships, learning from people he would have previously dismissed or overlooked, opening himself to new ways of thinking about leadership and service. It was messier, less predictable, and required more emotional energy than his old approach. but it was also infinitely more rewarding. Fletcher thought about Evelyn Torres, about how she had risked everything to save 6 lives, about how that single decision had rippled through decades, inspiring countless others to be better, to care more, to see people as ends in themselves rather than means to an end. He would never be able to match her courage or her sacrifice, but he could honor her example by trying, every single day, to be the kind of leader who saw people, who valued them, who was willing to challenge the system when the system got in the way of doing what was right. It wouldn't be easy. Fletcher knew himself well enough to recognize that his old patterns would keep reasserting themselves, that he would make mistakes, that there would be days when he fell short of his own aspirations. But he also knew now that growth was possible, that change was achievable, that it was never too late to become a better version of yourself. As he pulled into his driveway, Fletcher made a commitment to himself. Tomorrow, he would continue the work of transformation. He would listen to people, learn from them, challenge his assumptions, and push himself to see beyond ranks and positions to the human beings underneath. And someday, maybe, when his own career was over and he was looking back on what he had accomplished, he wanted to be able to say that he had made a difference. Not because he had organized perfect ceremonies or followed every regulation flawlessly, but because he had helped people, inspired them, created an environment where they could become their best selves. That was the legacy that mattered. That was the kind of officer the Navy needed. And thanks to an unexpected encounter with a remarkable woman who he had almost dismissed as unimportant, Fletcher finally understood what that meant. He got out of his car and walked toward his house, feeling lighter than he had in years. The future was uncertain, full of challenges and opportunities he couldn't yet predict. But for the first time in his career, Fletcher felt like he was heading in the right direction, guided by values that transcended rank and protocol, inspired by an example of courage and selflessness that would stay with him forever. The story of Evelyn Torres, the Angel of Al-Khobar, would continue to inspire future generations of SEALs and naval officers. But it had also changed one commander who had needed to learn that true leadership wasn't about perfect ceremonies or flawless execution of plans. It was about people, relationships, and the courage to put what was right ahead of what was easy or expected. And that lesson, Fletcher knew, was worth more than any promotion or commendation. It was the foundation of a life well lived and a career that actually mattered.